as the Director of Training and Education for NACOLE. I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar series, where today we'll be discussing the role of journalism in police accountability. Before we officially begin, I'd like to let you know of a few details regarding today's call. During the webinar, all attendees will be muted. As soon as we begin, however, you will have the ability to type in any questions you might have for Sarah or Martin. When we come to the question and answer portion of the webinar, your questions will be asked and answered as they have been received. You can also then ask follow-up questions by just typing them in. During the webinar, you may also send any questions you might have for me as the webinar administrator in the same manner, and I'll answer your questions as quickly as I can. I would like to also let you know that today's webinar will be recorded and will be posted on our website in approximately 30 days from today. If any of you do have to leave early, though, however, please feel free to contact me directly, and I'll work to get that to you a little sooner. At the conclusion of the webinar today, each of you will be given the opportunity to complete a brief survey on today's event. If you could please take a few minutes to complete this, it will help us as we move forward with enhancing and expanding our webinar series. With our housekeeping duties out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we have Sarah Cohen of the New York Times. She runs a team of data journalists who specialize in investigative reporting and enterprise stories. The team has worked on stories including justice issues, campaign finance, healthcare, and immigration, among others. She's also worked as a reporter, writer, and editor for newspapers in Florida and the Washington Post. She also teaches in the investigative reporting program at Columbia University and is currently the president of Investigative Reporters and Editors, a professional education association for journalists. Today we're also joined by Martin Katz, who is the correspondent on NPR's National Desk. He covers law enforcement and privacy, as well as news from the Pacific Northwest. He has reported on government's warrantless wiretapping practices, as well as data collection and analysis that go on behind the scenes in social media and other news media. With that, I will turn it over to Martin and Sarah, who will begin today's session.
Should I go first?
Sure. I think that. Thank you.
This is Martin Costi. I'm, in a nutshell, I cover police issues nationally for NPR, which means sort of broader policy things, individual that rise to sort of national interest. Obviously, in the last couple of years, that's been quite a few. You know, I kind of roam around. I don't have a close relationship with any particular jurisdiction, so that kind of affects to some degree how I do my work, and in some ways it can be sort of a hindrance because I've sort of got to learn the ropes everywhere I go. As I think you're all well aware, civilian oversight of police varies tremendously from place to place in this country. That's just our nature of the beast here, and what that means is that a reporter coming into a specific jurisdiction can, you know, find him or herself on completely different footing depending on sort of the status of the oversight entity in that in the pecking order of that place. So you know, I'll go to some cities and find out rather quickly that the oversight is tightly yoked in with the police executives in that place, and they're going to do it by the book. They don't have a lot of interest in talking to me sometimes, whereas I'm at one place in particular I'll remember, I mean, I reported on it, so I can name names. It was New Orleans, where the oversight entity there very much in practice was on the outs of the sort of flow chart. Their authority was limited, and they had a huge incentive to invite me in, not only into their offices, but into the process, and would demonstrate what happens when they call the local NOPD for some basic information about an incident, put it on speakerphone, and let me listen in to the stonewalling. So, you know, very different experiences depending on where I go and what the structure is. And so that's sort of the nature of what I do.
So this is Sarah Cohen. I kind of am almost the opposite of Martin, so you have a pretty good set of people here. I'm much more of a generalist, but tend to do longer-term investigations and enterprise pieces. I think that I met some of you all when I spoke at your conference a couple years ago on a story we did on police-involved domestic violence, which involved looking at a lot of disciplinary records from all different kinds of places, as well as some of the data sets available from some of the review of kind of the document side and the public record side of police and oversight of police, and a sense of how closely or unclosely held data is from different police departments. We've also done some work on shootings by police, obviously not at the level of the Washington Post and the Guardian, but we did some work on that. And we've recently just done a story on mass shootings that did involve looking at a lot of police departments and contacting a lot of police departments. And although it wasn't about disciplinary actions, it gave us a good sense of the culture of a lot of the police departments. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with it.
Thank you, both of you. At this point, I'm going to have a couple of questions for you to kind of guide the conversation. But at this point, if any of you have in the audience questions that you'd like to start queuing up for me to answer us, to do so. One of the first things I wanted to ask was, I think all of us have seen an increase in the prevalence of stories of alleged and actual police misconduct, an increase of that and a more prominent positioning of that in newspapers, in both the print and visual media. And so I kind of wanted your thoughts on the journey of this issue, because we know it's not a new issue. It's just getting a more prominent position in some of the media that we've seen. And I wanted your issue on the journey towards that prominence, and then how you see it continuing from this point. Do you see it fading back to the background again, or do you think that we're on a journey now that is going to continue?
Actually, I think that change that happened surrounding Ferguson is really interesting because of a couple of things. So I'd shifted into the police issues beat about a year before Ferguson. So in some ways the timing was perfect, because I was just starting to get my feet under me on the beat, starting to get an understanding of police culture and the whole question of police reform. And what was fascinating was that right before Ferguson, you would have asked the average cop about, police abuse, use of force, that kind of thing, and the consensus was that things are so much better now than they were a generation ago. That officers, on the average, are better educated now, they're better trained, that thumpers are turned in more quickly. There's less tolerance in the department for that, less covering up. It's just not like the bad old days. That was the prevailing sense. And then Ferguson happened, and it really puzzled the police community, for lack of a better word, because they thought things were on the mend. And then this blows up, and there's clearly a national sense all of a sudden that things are very bad. And I think some of the sort of tried and true explanations are partly true. It was a lot about the rise of video documentation by civilians. The fact that when you read sort of some dry words in the newspaper about some incident, it's very different from seeing the video up close, and that sort of made everything more visceral. And I think Black Lives Matter and similar movements galvanized through social media that sense that things were still unacceptable. But I think I think part of the problem right now between the police and the public since Ferguson is that disconnect, where the police think things were actually more professional now, and the public, mystifyingly to them, thinks that things have gone off the rails, when, well, it could be that things have always been this bad, but now they're noticing. That's one point of view, but on the police point of view, well, things are better than they ever have been. So it was a fascinating sort of clash of perceptions.
Say that, to the original question, I don't see this going away. What I can tell you, though, is that because we're seeing so much more citizen involvement in recording police activity, at the same time we're kind of seeing closing of ranks around records and information from the police department. And it does concern me a little bit that the secrecy that goes on among the departments and among the oversight and the disciplinary boards kind of only lets you see one little piece. You know, you're kind of like at the elephant and you'd only see the leg. One of the most interesting pieces I've seen, I know we did it and then I saw it, I happened to see that NBC did a similar thing, was, and I'm sure some of you all have seen it, was that video of what something looks like from a body camera versus what is actually going on. And in one case it looks like a police officer is being beat up, and when you pull back it turns out they're dancing with each other. So, you know, one of those problems is that we're getting, it may be that things are a little bit better, but the secrecy doesn't help give the full picture. When I was working on the police, police-involved domestic violence stories, what I found really interesting is that the disciplinary reports and the internal affairs reports are public except for some redactions. And it gave us a much fuller view of what from the surface looked like an awful situation. And then when you read the actual report, you realized, you know, this is a lot more nuanced than it seems. So it's something to think about, that as things are, I believe they're going to stay in the spotlight, it's something to think about is whether or not the secrecy surrounding it is, you know, giving the public the full 360 view of what's going on.
What I find most interesting about that is the contrast between the secrecy that you still deal with and the lack of transparency. But at the same time, many of us are seeing and are excited by this increased access to data sets. And I wonder if you can expand, because you work so specifically with data and data mining, if you could talk about a little bit more about that. Oh, sorry, everyone.
Yeah. I'm sorry, something just happened on my computer. Okay.
Mine too. Okay.
Anyway, well, the thing is that people talk about all of this access to data sets, but there's really very little access to data. I mean, it's extremely limited. As an example, in New York City, the only thing we get from the police department was required by the city council, and all it is Part 1 crimes by date and location. That's it. And there is virtually nothing available on anything beyond that, including, for instance, the police get to decide what they're going to put a press release out about, even if there's a shooting. So I don't see that there's actually all that data out there, and especially surrounding police discipline or police misconduct or police oversight. One of the things that I thought was interesting, I know that there's been a lot of issues with the IPRA in Chicago lately, but one of the more interesting things that we were able to do was to look at the closed cases, at least from IPRA, and I know that more recently more documents have been made public, but I'm not really seeing all the data that a lot of people are talking about in terms of how the public can help work on police accountability, because there's really nothing that they can see about it. Now, maybe Martin has seen other places where that's not true, but I just haven't seen that kind of transparency at all.
No, I think I agree 100% that you know, there's a lot of happy talk right now about the new spirit of data sharing, and I think the reality, you know, across the 17,000 odd agencies, whatever it is so, it varies wildly, and I think tends toward the opaque. And I think, frankly, inconsistency is going to become more and more a real problem. Inconsistency of rules, inconsistency of data sharing rules, whether it be body cameras or investigation records, whatever it is. You know, the public does not spend their days thinking about this stuff, so they don't appreciate the nuance of our decentralized system where each state has its own privacy laws and each jurisdiction has its own protocols for when to release things. All they see is inconsistency. They see, oh, they're releasing video when the cop looks like he did the right thing, but they're not releasing it and they don't necessarily see the different jurisdiction involved. When there's a cloud over them, they use the investigation excuse, and I think that breeds cynicism. It undermines confidence, and I think it's going to be a real challenge over the next few years, because I agree with Sarah, this is not going to go away, as the public sort of has a sense that the rules are designed by the people playing the game as the game is going, and that there's, you can't count on consistency, and I think, that's in our we don't have a top-down system of policing in this country, so it's a lot harder to do here what they do in Europe, to just have something consistent that people can count on. But I think the public expects that somehow, and how you square that circle, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I have two ideas on that. Is one of the things is a lot of people look at places like Florida, Ohio, Wisconsin, sometimes Texas, and may think that things are worse there than they are elsewhere. And it goes back to that old story, the old proverb about the drunken man looking for his keys under the lamppost, and the police asks why he's under the lamppost, and that's because that's where the light is. And in the states where there is less secrecy, we can see more. That's one side of it. But the other side is we did a story last summer using the new information from an annual police administrative survey that the Department of Justice does. And for the first time, they had asked the question about how many times was use of force used in that jurisdiction. And the data that came out of it was completely useless, because the concept of what is use of force is so different from one place to the next. And even places like New York City said they couldn't even give an answer at all, because they don't know how often use of force is used, because it's only recorded as part of an arrest or stop and frisk. So, that kind of inconsistency then also doesn't even let us do anything that's more general than this individual incident or some individual event.
And that's where I think, this is not opinion, this is analysis, but I think that's where the White House's police reform efforts have really missed an opportunity. In May they had the rollout of their data sharing initiative, I forget what the official name was, but they were very, very, very careful not to even, they obviously don't have authority to impose anything, but they didn't even come out with recommended best practices for defining things like what is a use of force. Saying, okay, you police departments that are progressive-minded and want to join us in this, they said that, please join us in sharing your data, but then do it however you want to. And that's, how does that help to get a national sense or even a statewide sense of what's going on? It was so politically fraught for them to even come out with, here's a model to follow, which means it's like Sarah's saying, it becomes so hard to compare anything.
Thank you. I think that having that honest conversation about data and its limitations is nice, and it's hopefully, I'll interject an opinion, is something that we'll continue to talk about a lot more, that we don't seem complacent in the fact that, well, at least we're getting something now. Even if it's not the standard set or even all of it. On that note, I do have a question from one of our attendees, Gia in Denver. She asked, I'm interested to know how you get information when our agencies are often on tenuous terms with the departments we oversee. I ask because often we are contacted and don't feel like we can give background without there being an expectation of a quote or of our outing ourselves and making our work more difficult in our cities. Could you respond to that?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear all of that. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, absolutely. She writes, I'm interested to know how you get information when our agencies are often on tenuous terms with the departments we oversee. I ask because often we are contacted and don't feel like we can give background without there being an expectation of a quote or of our outing ourselves and making our work more difficult.
From my perspective, I would be thrilled if I could just get background, and have something that maybe I should be warned off of or pointed towards something I should be pointed toward, but I can speak as somebody who mainly works on projects and isn't under any kind of pressure to get the quote of the day. So maybe Martin could talk a little bit about that from his perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the whole question of whether you're quoted or identified, that's all about trust. If you have a sense that you can trust the journalist calling you, and I think, you know, I don't think it's going too far to say I think you can in most cases. You know, and look them up if you want to. Do a quick Google search. But you know, anybody working for a reputable journalism outfit, you know, is going to work with you on shielding you to what extent you need. You know, if you're not kind of part of this process on a regular basis, you know, the things to keep in mind are, you know, things are off the record if you agree. So if you say, look, I want to tell you something, but let's figure out what the rules are ahead of time. And if the journalist agrees, that's the agreement. You don't say, you know, you can't. I'm trying to protect you here. Don't expect off the record or background treatment without saying it. But if you say it clearly, and this person is a stand-up person, you should feel confident in that. And I think, you know, I work in radio, so I love to get it. I want to get it on tape eventually. But in terms of there being an expectation, I think is how your question phrased it. Sarah's right that the main thing for us is to understand. You know, point us in the right direction.
And the other side to think about is the more documents or data that original documents and data that a reporter can get, the less they have to identify anybody or use quotes.
Exactly.
So if you are, you know, it depends on what you are legally allowed to give out or how you want to handle that. But if you can point a reporter toward a document or a data point that they can use instead of a quote to help them understand, they're probably happier.
But don't assume we know anything. I mean,
yeah,
you know,
don't assume anything. That's right.
You know, you can't insult our intelligence by explaining how things work in your shop. It's just like I was saying at the top of this thing. You know, the variety between one place and the next is so huge that you're not going to insult us. Tell us what assumptions we're making that are completely off base. Make sure we know basic things about where you work. You know, that'll save all of us a lot of trouble and mistakes.
That's very helpful. Thank you. We have another question from our audience, and the first one actually is someone wants to get your take on the most recent U.S. Supreme Court case, Utah versus Street.
That got garbled again. The specifics on some Supreme Court something?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me try that again. What is your take on the most recent U.S. Supreme Court case, Utah versus Street?
I don't know what that one is. I might know what it said, but I don't know the names of them.
Okay, let me see if I can...
yeah. That's the one 3 days ago about suppressing evidence. If the stop...
Oh, okay.
I'm trying. Yeah, I think that we haven't done enough yet on what that implies for police. I'd love to talk to you guys about that because I don't know. You're the ones to tell us. The whole question of whether all of a sudden it's going to be built into common policing, you know, an illegal stop. But if someone's got a valid warrant, you can arrest them anyway. I think that's how that worked. I think that's really interesting. And you know, whether that returns us to a more quote-unquote practical form of policing than we used to have, as some police would say it, or more, you know, intuitive policing, which is, I think, the euphemism often. I don't know. I mean, I can't wait to see what that actually produces.
We did some work last year on, particularly in North Carolina, on traffic stops and what they produced. And, you know, it seemed like that has been going on quite a bit anyway. So I don't know. It's more of, it almost seems like it would have been more of a change if they hadn't upheld it, but I may be misunderstanding it. So I would hate to say that I completely understand the court case.
I mean, certainly, you know, probable cause is often found after the fact, right?
In addition, someone has asked a question, Kelvin from Philadelphia has asked, How has covering police and law enforcement changed throughout your careers?
How has, I'm sorry, what?
How has covering police and law enforcement changed throughout your career?
I mean, the big thing to me is that, you know, in the old days, right, you would work in the police department. I mean, you would go there, you would have 2 or 3 reporters who were inside the police department, not inside just a media pen, basically, but, you know, had pretty wide-ranging access to the building, and could develop relationships, and this has happened in every government agency, the ability for reporters to get to know and to build a relationship with the line-level people that they're covering has become extremely difficult, and I think it has contributed to the mistrust of a lot of government employees towards reporters, because they just don't know each other anymore. And especially at the local level, it was very common for reporters and the people they covered to know each other quite well and to know what they could trust and what they couldn't. So that to me seems like the biggest thing. What do you think, Martin?
I agree 100%. I mean, I'm relatively new on the police beat, you know, 5 years now, but 4 years. But you're right that overall, in covering any kind of government agency, that's been true. You know, the employees now have the fear of God put into them about talking to us. There are all these strict rules about go through the PIO, go through PIO, and then there's all these stalling techniques, at least that's the way they seem to us, where, okay, can you put your questions in writing, which of course you don't put your questions in writing, but, well, okay, you know, you just say, can I talk to the deputy chief on this? Can you send me an email about that? Well, I'm talking to you on the phone right now. You know, and it's everything's funneled to those really stilted formal relationships. Over time, you know, you do still develop relationships. I still, you know, that's where your Rolodex of people whose cell phones you have who have come to trust you is vital, because those are the people who understand what I was talking about earlier, that they can trust you, that you're not going to burn them. But, you know, convincing a lot of people who quite rightly are worried about their careers that you can trust them is a laborious process, and it was a lot, you know, it was a lot easier before the message management gurus took over.
And what that leads to is that the only time we talk to people is when we need a quote or when we need a story, rather than just as part of how's it going today. And those kinds of relationships are incredibly important to build. And it also lets you know, when you can build those relationships, it really lets you know what is actually going on, not what it looks like is going on. And so I think the reporting was more accurate back when we had those more of those relationships.
Part of it is our fault too. Our business has become so hectic. If you're not producing, you know, you're in trouble. That we have less time to cultivate those human relationships. And I'll give a shout out to Pierce Murphy here at the Seattle OPA in case he's listening. He's one of the friendliest guys I've ever talked to on the phone. We end every conversation with, we've got to get together for coffee, and we never do, and we're in the same city. So Pierce, if you're listening, I will do that soon.
I have another question about, we have several people listening in today who are from smaller cities than New York or Seattle, who would like to, they understand that engaging the media in their community and having relationships with them is important, but might not know how to do that. And if you have any thoughts or suggestions, advice about how those relationships can be built and the benefits of them. I know we talked a little bit about this, but if you could expand more.
The easiest way is to pick up the phone. If you read the news in your area and you see the name of a reporter who is either misunderstanding things and not reporting the way that you would think would be accurate, or somebody who you think is really bright and really terrific, literally just pick up the phone and tell them who you are and say, you know what, I'd just like to go for coffee and tell you about what we do. And, you know, I'm not looking for a story, I'm not looking for publicity, I just want to get to know you because, you know, I think it's important that the public understand. That is the absolute easiest thing to do, and almost every reporter will jump at that.
For sure, yeah, I think I echo that, yeah.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions if there are any more out there. I'll give all of you a little time to send those in case there are some more questions on your mind. While I'm waiting, however, I will ask, how do you think that have social movements like Black Lives Matter affected the way that you do your work? And if so, how?
Again, I missed probably a keyword past something.
Sorry, I am apparently having a clear speaking issue today.
No, we keep cutting in and out, I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the connection, not you.
Okay. How have social movements such as Black Lives Matter, or how have they affected the work that you do, if they have in fact affected the way that you approach your work?
I mean, you try not, anytime something you're covering becomes polarized politically, everything becomes a lot more, you step a lot more gingerly. You can't help it. You don't want to obviously let it affect you, but you know, you tread more carefully. You write your scripts or your stories already hearing the response of how people are going to assume this you're in the bag for the other side. You're always a little more worried about you know, the dueling narratives and language. Oh my gosh, language becomes, you know, a very innocent word becomes very fraught real quickly, and you don't even know it until it's too late. So I mean, it just sort of makes everything a lot tenser that way.
On the positive side, I agree with that completely. It becomes like trying to report on Israel. But I agree with that completely. But on the other side, what I think it has done is it has given reporters the ability to find voices that they never would have been able to find in the past. You know, in the past, maybe we would try to go to a neighborhood and talk to people, but here there are people who are like really embedded in the neighborhoods and know the people involved and are able to connect us with voices that we wouldn't have heard on one side. And on another side, I was on a Freedom of Information panel, and I am really apologetic. I don't remember who it was who was on this panel, but he's a Black Lives Matter activist, and what he has done has been collecting the disciplinary, the police shooting, I think, procedures from every police department around the country that he can. And so some of the activists are actually doing our job for us, which is the slogging work of trying to put together the data sets that don't exist, to gather the documents that we haven't been able to get. So in that sense, it has widened our view of issues beyond what we were able to get at before.
Yeah, I agree, and I just want to clarify when I was saying before, you know, the language being fraught. This comes from both sides. I mean,
yeah.
I'll get that same kind of reaction from, you know, the police supporters, whatever you want to call them. You know, any name I give them right now is equally politically charged. So, you know, almost, you know, you definitely steer away from certain terms just to not create a fight that distracts from your story. But you know, it just when the things get hypercharged, things get nervous. But you're right that it also brings things to the surface. I mean, frankly, if Ferguson hadn't happened, I would not have had, I don't know how many stories in the last 2 years about the fine points of body cam video release and who get wouldn't have rated national news over and over and over again. But now, boy, you know.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have another question from Camelia. How do you balance building a relationship with law enforcement and information you receive that might negatively impact the relationship?
You want to take that, Martin, first?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So balance my relationship with officers with the information I might get from them that might be negative, or information from other sources that might. I'm not sure what the point is.
I think that they're asking, how do you maintain and balance a relationship with law enforcement, but at the same time you may be receiving information that can negatively impact your relationship with them? receiving that information and reporting on it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not their buddies in terms of professional on a professional level. Or in terms of what's the right way to put this? I am a human being who has relationships with people, but they also understand I'm a professional who does I need to report the news, and I don't. I believe in cultivating sources who understand the nature of my job. I don't want to cultivate innocents who are oblivious to how that works. So I think they know that if I get information that's newsworthy, that's negative, that I will use it. Now yes, somebody might stop talking to me after that. That's the price of our business. Is that answering the question? I'm not sure.
I guess
to us that's just journalism, right?
Yeah, I mean that happens in every beat and every story, and the idea is that if you have a relationship with someone, then when you get that information, you can talk with them about the truth of it and not have to go through put your questions in writing, or they might be misunderstood. So that relationship, but that doesn't mean we're not going to report on it. I think that most people I've dealt with in my career, as long as they know that you're being honest and working really hard to get to the truth, they understand that if something negative is going to come out, it's going to come out. And so no, we're not there to protect them, but building a relationship does mean that you have more access to be able to say, here's what is happening. I don't mean to make light of this, but there was a reporter who I used to know who, when she would start an investigation, she would call the subject of that investigation every week to tell him what she had learned about him that week. And that was all part of this kind of trying to build this idea that, like, I'm not going to go away, but I'm going to treat you fairly. And it worked for her.
I really like that. I'm one of the few reporters kind of on the national level who tries not to go off the record background if I can help it, because in some ways it creates sort of false expectations. But if I need to, I will. But I think working with more clarity and more transparency, like your colleague there, is better than playing games about whose side. Pretending I'm here and I'm your friend when actually you might be working on something that undermines them is just dishonest. But if people are willing to listen to what you're doing, and you can convince them that you're going to be fair, it's, I think, usually in their interest to work with you.
Thank you for those answers very much. I think that's very helpful. We now have a question from Hillary. From your perspective, what factors make specific allegations of police misconduct newsworthy? From my perspective, it seems that the most egregious cases are not necessarily the same as those that receive the most media attention.
Can you email me later with what you're thinking of? I want to hear what you think.
We don't know those egregious cases because we only see the ones that, again, that goes back to the secrecy surrounding it, is that we're not aware of those probably, and we have no way to become aware of them. To me, what is newsworthy is one of two things. One is lying about what happened, and that happens. And I will be honest with you, we were considering doing a series like the Washington Post on police shootings, and we came to the conclusion that it would take so much reporting to figure out what the actual truth was, not what the truth according to news reports and according to the reports that were made public was, that we didn't feel like we could actually do it. So I think that, not telling the truth about what happened, shading the truth is one thing. Another thing is when it reveals policies and procedures that appear to be unfair or appear to favor the police more than the citizenry. But that would be from my kind of project reporter perspective. I'm curious what Martin thinks.
I agree with those guidelines for what makes it interesting, especially if you're talking on the national level. You're looking for things that, incidents that that reveal a pattern that people didn't realize was going on, or you know, clarity does make a difference. It's just a sad fact that a lot of the most celebrated incidents of the last couple of years became national news only because they were on video and it was pretty clear what happened, whereas if they'd been reported, you know, through the police report or something, you could imagine any number of scenarios that would explain it away. So, you know, video or some other corroborating evidence also makes a big difference. I wasn't being glib when I said email me, because I'm actually really curious for the insight of people like you who are listening as to what we're missing in terms of the real abuses that are systematic and yet we don't see because we're not attuned to them, because maybe they're not cinematic enough or whatever it might be. I'd love to hear what you're seeing in terms of things that we overlook, patterns that we overlook. It would be great to hear that.
Yeah, and I just want to add one other thing. I'll put my professorial hat on. I was a professor at Duke when I'm blanking on the name of it, the case in Florida happened. And I was teaching at Columbia during Ferguson, and I kept telling my students that, you know, they were really, really going off on it. I said the first and second day, and I was like, these things never are as easy and as simple as they look. You know, the first day story always makes it sound like you know exactly what went on, and you don't. And so the Trayvon Williams case is the one I was thinking of, and that they're always more nuanced than they are. And even Ferguson, that turned out to be true. And so I think that sometimes we grasp onto something because it captures an imagination, and now we're under an obligation to follow through with it because we can't just let it stand the way it started out. So you kind of get yourself in a thing where once it's news one day, you kind of have to follow it through, or else you're leaving people without a full story.
Yeah. Great moment if you're thinking about when to contact the reporter that you've never contacted, is in moments like that when it seems like the entire media are galloping off with a first blush impression of what happened. You know more. Call someone like us, call us, and
we're very happy to
and tell us. You know, you can say, "Can we do this off the record to start with? I need to give you some background. I want to point out that you're going in the wrong direction here, but I can't go on the record right now." You know, if nothing else, give us that information, because even if we can't rely just on you, you'll have given us the clue to look somewhere for something else, something that complicates the story, and we
or give us questions to ask or something.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, questions to ask is a great thing. You know, if nothing else, even if you don't want to, I mean, we'd love you to give us information directly. Do that. But if you can't bring yourself to do that, tell us what question we should be asking, because that's just as helpful.
To request.
Right. Exactly. What documents to request, who has them, which agency to ask for them.
That's incredibly helpful. We also have another question about, in a union-heavy state like Washington, collective bargaining agreements prevent oversight agencies from opining on cases, but can only report on trends and statistics. How can oversight agencies and the media work together to shed light on the areas oversight agencies cannot? Is this something that a journalist is interested in?
Yeah, that is, I mean, every place I've worked has this problem, right? Washington, D.C. has that, and New York City really has it. I think one of the things that would be helpful would be, in those cases, to go to lunch with somebody and talk about, these are the trends that I'm seeing that aren't coming across in our statistics, and I can't give you names, but to describe a couple of cases so that we can get a sense of what we're thinking of, and we might be able to come up with a way to get documents or data that doesn't require anyone breaking the confidentiality rules. The bargaining agreements are incredibly strict in a lot of places, and it's a real problem for accountability, I think.
And some state laws like California's.
It was so funny. I was watching. I stumbled on Cagney and Lacey on Hulu a couple months ago, and I happened to watch this one episode where Cagney was complaining that anybody can walk into the police department and with a Freedom of Information Act request get her entire disciplinary history. And I'm like, when was that? You know? Like 1974 or something.
Might not have been fact
Right.
I wonder.
The other thing that sometimes works, I mean, I know that some academics will be able to make agreements with police departments to get records for research projects. Mm-hmm. And if an agency actually is interested in helping journalists get the real picture, we have in the past at the Times, and in fact we're in the process of working with one now with another agency, a different agency, not the police department. We have done research agreements with agencies that says that we will not use what we find in these files to go contact people, but we will use them to get a better sense of what's happening. So if your city or your town is interested, I bet you could work out an arrangement maybe under the auspices of a university with a journalist's input.
Have you managed to set up a system to anonymize those records or something like that?
We actually just leave them in like a locked room that only a couple people can go into in the cases where it's the most sensitive. In some cases, we make the agreement that we can only use it for journalistic purposes and we won't use the names as a way to find stories. Other cases, we say that we will use it to confirm things that we find other ways. I mean, it does involve some trust between, but it's considered a research agreement as opposed to a release of documents.
It's just another example of how you know, people have the sense, probably from the movies, that the moment you contact a journalist, you know, you're committed to something that may just, you know, you might get swept over the falls. But no, everything can be talked about. Everything can be negotiated. A relationship gets built over time. You will have time, if you want it, to suss out where the journalist is coming from, what he or she wants to do, and you know, no one's you know, rushing you here to either decide whether to clam up completely and never return the phone call, or to talk to us and see what it is we're after. I mean, you know, you're allowed to take the time and ask us questions, and you should ask us questions about what we're doing with the data. And
then the other thing, in terms of this, goes back to like, who do you contact? In the smaller communities, what you will find is that there's either the news organization that's there is quite small, and you might want to build that relationship with the executive editor, not with the reporter, because the reporter's going to come and go. But on the other side is that you might also look in your state. Many states now have a nonprofit investigative journalism site, and they would all be members of the, it used to be called Investigative News Network. It's still INN, but I don't remember what it stands for, inn.org. And there will be probably one in each state, and those are the folks who can take longer and are there to try to get beyond the news of the day. So those are good people to develop relationships with also.
Thank you. We do have another question from one of our listening sessions, the one in Urbana, Illinois. And they're wondering if you have an opinion on what a minimum toolkit as it relates to civilian oversight agencies, what that might look like. Particularly, do relationships between police and review boards improve with expanded subpoena power, contact with union representatives, personnel, etc.?
I don't have a good handle on that one, Martin.
If I understand the question correctly, what we think the minimum toolkit for an oversight body should be, how it should work, what its power should be. I don't think I'm in a position professionally to have an opinion or to express an opinion about that. I mean, that's a very political question. You know, especially when you're talking. I mean, you know, and officers, for good reason, have very strong feelings about things like whether the people doing the oversight should have some kind of police experience, whether they should be part of the chain of command, whether or not they should have subpoena powers. I mean, those are you know, just ask Black Lives Matter that on the subpoena question. Those are very live political questions for the subset of Americans who care about this issue right now. So I will say that I'm not going to go out there and say, civilian oversight should look like X. I mean, if the closest thing I'm going to say is what I said before, which is some version of clarity, consistency, culturally across the board will, if possible, if we could achieve that, would probably do a lot to bolster public opinion, public support, and public confidence in the oversight process. Anything that looks like inconsistency or arbitrary actions is really bad and toxic for the system.
Understood and very much agreed with. We have time for a couple more questions. The first one that I have as we close out is, how is it appropriate to correct misquoted information without throwing the media source under the bus? Fact finders don't want to do this, but want to make sure they get it right and not just sensationalize the story. So I guess the basis of that question is, how is it appropriate to correct misquoted information and kind of guide the story in a factful way?
I mean, you should always contact the reporter if you feel that something has been misunderstood or misquoted. The one thing that I think that some people get a little confused about, though, is that we are going to write only a small portion of what we hear. Disagreements about what the most important things to include are. Just try to make sure that you're distinguishing in your mind between different emphases or things that are left out versus things that are put in, or the direction of the story, whether it's an honest disagreement on that, or whether you really feel like something has been erroneously said. I'm not saying you shouldn't call. In either case, you should if you feel like that, but it'll make that conversation go easier if in your mind you have those two things separated.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. This is the part of our jobs where we're actually in a position that's very similar to the cops who are brought up on some kind of complaint, frankly, and we even have a parallel to civilian oversight in that some of us have ombudsmen, although there's an important distinction, whereas we're not public servants, and you know, for good reason, and so you know, they don't necessarily have direct authority over us in our jobs. They are still a way for the public to express you know, to lodge a complaint. It's
Well,
you
we'll lose our jobs if this happens too often. Yeah.
Right. That's true. That's true. But it's not the ombudsman that gets to decide that. That's for sure.
Right.
It's our bosses. But don't go to the ombudsman first. So I'm echoing Sarah again here. But you know, this is an era of data openness. This internet age where everyone, you know, we've gotten finally used to the idea that people are going to come back to us with responses to what we do. It's not just one-way street anymore, which is good. That means we've had to learn how not to get defensive. So don't make us defensive when you call. Call us collaborating on the story for the next round. I get a lot of good emails that say, thanks for your story on the thing I care about a lot. I wish you had, or next time I hope you emphasize this more. This is a part you left out. I'd like to see a story about that sometime in the future. And you know, a reporter who's not defensive will file that away and say, yeah, next time I come close to this issue, I'm going to look at that more closely again, make sure that I'm not, you know, overlooking it. If it's an outright factual error, we will run a correction at NPR on our website. If it's egregious enough, there will be corrections on the air. No reporter wants that to happen. It feels terrible, but it will happen if it's a clear factual error. But if it's, you know, you got the emphasis wrong, you left out an important part of the story, that's, like Sarah says, part of the editorial process. You've got to pick your angle at some point.
But the other thing, as I said, would not wait, because like for our website, for instance, if you're really interested in this topic, it might pop up for you like within 2 or 3 minutes of when it's been published. Mm-hmm. We can fix it in 2 or 3 minutes so that not very many people will see that mistake. So don't wait if you think that it is a truly a factual error.
And the longer you wait, the madder you'll get about it, and maybe a good conversation with the reporter will make everybody feel better about it too.
just came in. I think we'll finish up with this one. Dave asked, what's the most significant law enforcement event or story that you have covered, and how has it impacted your career?
Single event, like a single story? That's a hard one. I mean, I think we're all still in the middle of this giant rolling story that, in retrospect, is going to be seen, I think, as a watershed moment in American policing, which started in 2014. I mean, I think of that as one big story, but I don't know. That's a cop-out answer, I know.
I don't know either. So, I mean, my first, I was doing before I worked at the Washington Post. We did a huge, I was a contractor there, and we did a huge story on police shootings that had a lot of an effect on the city. And what we found there was that there was a combination of a lack of training and defective weapons that had led to a lot of excessive shootings in D.C. And I felt that that story was one of those where it could have turned into, oh, bad cops, right? But it turned into, oh my gosh, there's something really bad going on that, you know, how could they do the right thing? And I feel like that's an example of a story where taking the time to learn why something happens makes a big difference.
Yeah, I agree.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah and Martin, for your time today. And thank you to everyone out there who attended today's session. And I also want to thank you in advance for taking a few moments to complete the online survey that's going to pop up once the webinar is completed. Our webinar series
so much
for several. It has been a pleasure. I think that we probably could hopefully do this again sometime in the future. I think that this is a continuing conversation, and I think that particularly those in the audience who are from oversight entities have benefited greatly from the information you provided them today. So thank you.
And contact us.
Yes, I will. I will make sure
to.
Yes, I will make sure in a follow-up email to all of those who attended today's session to include both Sarah and Martin's email addresses so that you can contact them directly to discuss these issues further. So thank you for allowing me to send that information out.
Yeah.
Well, it was fun. Thank you.
Thank you. For those in attendance, we will be having a webinar series. Will continue after this, and so please continue to check your inboxes for those upcoming sessions and information and registration information. So thank you again. Have a good day, and we will be talking with all of you again soon. Thank you.